He poured concrete over my driveway while I was away on a military assignment, and when I got back, I couldn't even reach my own front door. At first I thought it was some kind of mistake, maybe a construction mix-up, but then he walked out, looked me dead in the eye, and told me I should just figure something else out. That was the moment I realized this wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. I live on a narrow stretch of land just outside a small town in western Colorado, the kind of place where people wave even if they don't know you, where fences matter but trust matters more. My house sits tucked behind another property, and the only way in or out is a gravel driveway that cuts across the front parcel. It's not unusual out here. A lot of older properties were divided up that way years ago, and mine came with a recorded easement, filed properly with the county, mapped out down to the inch. It's permanent, it's legal, and it's the only access I've ever had. I bought the place back in 2011 after getting out of my first active duty rotation, and I remember the realtor pointing at that thin strip of land like it was nothing, just a technicality, but I made sure to ask questions, got copies of everything, even had a local attorney look it over. I didn't want surprises later. Back then, the house in front was owned by an older couple, quiet folks, kept to themselves, never had a single issue with them. We'd chat once in a while, bring each other mail if it got mixed up, that kind of thing. Everything stayed that way for years, until the day the property sold. I remember the first time I saw the new owners, a couple in their early 40s. Maybe, sharp-looking, expensive truck, clean boots that had never seen actual dirt. Their names were Ryan and Claire Whitaker. They didn't move in right away, though. Instead, they brought in demolition crews within weeks. The old house was torn down faster than I expected, like it had never even been there, and in its place started rising this massive modern build, steel framing, glass walls, flat roof, the kind of house that looks like it belongs in a magazine, not at the end of a dusty access road. At first, I didn't think much of it. People have money. They build what they want, not my business. The only thing that crossed my mind was whether they understood the easement, because my driveway cut straight through what would clearly become their front yard. I got my answer about a month into construction. Ryan walked over one afternoon while I was stacking firewood, hands in his pockets, sunglasses on, like he was already posing for something. He didn't waste time with small talk. He just said, "Hey, quick question. Have you ever thought about rerouting your driveway?" I remember leaning on the log splitter, wiping sweat off my forehead, kind of squinting at him because I wasn't sure if he was serious. I said, "Rerouting it where?" He gestured vaguely toward the side road, a narrow, uneven strip that wasn't even connected to my property. "You could probably cut something in from over there. Would make things cleaner." Cleaner. I actually laughed a little, not because it was funny, but because it felt so out of touch with reality. I told him, "That driveway's not just there by coincidence. It's a recorded easement. Been that way long before you bought the place." He smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile you give when you understand something. It was the kind you give when you think the other person just doesn't get it yet. "Sure," he said, "but things can change. We're investing a lot into this build." And there it was, not said outright, but clear as day. He saw my access as an inconvenience, something temporary, something that could be negotiated away if you pushed hard enough. I shook my head and kept it simple. It's not up for negotiation. It's legal access. It stays. He held that smile for a second longer, then nodded like he'd just filed something away for later. "All right," he said, "just thought I'd ask." That was the last real conversation we had before everything went sideways. Construction ramped up after that. Big trucks coming in early, concrete mixers, deliveries at all hours. It got loud, dusty, sometimes blocked up the road for a bit, but I didn't complain. I figured it was temporary, and honestly, I've been around worse. Army life teaches you to tolerate a lot more than noise and inconvenience. Still, there were little things, small signals that something wasn't right. Equipment would get parked just a little too close to the driveway, forcing me to edge my truck through tight gaps. Workers would give me looks like they weren't expecting me to be there, like I was the one out of place. Once, I even found stacks of building materials partially blocking the easement, not completely, but enough to make a point. I moved them myself and didn't say anything. Looking back, maybe that was my mistake, assuming it would sort itself out. About 2 months into the build, I got called out for a short assignment, just under a week. Nothing unusual, just routine work, but it meant I had to leave the property unattended. Before I left, I drove out that same gravel strip, dust kicking up behind me. No signs of anything out of the ordinary except the skeleton of their house growing taller by the day. If I had known what I was coming back to, I might have taken pictures, called someone, done something different. But I didn't. I came back late Sunday evening, tired, road-worn, just wanting to get home, take a shower, sit in my own space for a while. It was already dark when I turned onto the access road, headlights cutting through the trees, and at first, everything looked different. Cleaner, maybe. Brighter. Then I realized why. I slowed the truck down, leaning forward over the wheel, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, because the driveway wasn't there anymore. In its place was a wide, smooth concrete courtyard stretching across the entire front of their new house, lit up with low landscape lights, decorative stone planters lining the edges like something out of a design catalog. It looked finished, polished, intentional. And my road, my only way home, was gone, buried underneath it. I just sat there for a second, engine idling, staring straight ahead, like if I looked long enough it might somehow undo itself. That's when the front door opened. Ryan stepped out, casual as ever, walking toward my headlights like this was just another normal evening. He stopped a few feet from my truck, hands on his hips, and said, "Oh yeah, meant to talk to you about that." About that. I rolled the window down slowly, trying to keep my voice level. "You poured over my driveway." He nodded, like we were discussing paint colors. "We redesigned the approach. It flows better with the house. Increases the property value." I blinked, trying to process how someone could say something like that with a straight face. "How am I supposed to get to my house?" He shrugged. Actually shrugged. "You'll probably have to put in another access point. That side street we talked about could work." I let that sit for a second, the audacity of it, the complete dismissal of everything I'd already told him. "There's a recorded easement," I said, slower this time, making sure every word landed. "You don't get to just erase that." He tilted his head slightly, like he was humoring me. "You'll have to take that up with someone," he said, then turned and started walking back toward his house. No argument, no apology, just done. And in that moment, sitting there in the dark, staring at a slab of concrete where my road used to be, I realized something important. He wasn't confused about the law. He just didn't think it applied to him. I didn't chase after him, didn't raise my voice. I just put the truck in reverse, backed out slowly, and drove into town. That night, I checked into a cheap roadside motel, dropped my bag on the floor, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at the copies of my property documents I kept in a folder. Because if he wanted to pretend that easement didn't exist, I was about to remind him exactly why it did. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was angry, not in the loud, explosive way people expect, but in that quiet, steady way where your mind keeps turning things over, connecting dots, replaying conversations you didn't realize mattered at the time. I kept seeing his face in my head, that calm little shrug, like he'd already decided how this was going to end, and I think that's what bothered me the most. It wasn't just that he blocked my access. It was that he genuinely believed I'd roll over and figure something else out. By sunrise, I was already up, sitting at that small motel table with a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been reheated 3 times, flipping through my closing documents. I'd kept everything, every map, every clause, every signature. Back when I bought the place, people told me I was being overly cautious, but I've spent enough time in the military to know that the problems you don't prepare for are the ones that cost you later. And there it was, clear as day. A recorded easement, perpetual, non-transferable, tied to the land itself, not the owner, with a precise survey map showing exactly where that driveway ran. Not approximately, not subject to change, exact. Measured. Filed with the county. I remember leaning back in that chair and just exhaling slowly, not relieved exactly, but grounded. This wasn't a gray area. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a mistake on his part. And mistakes like that, they tend to get expensive. The first place I went was the county recorder's office. It's one of those old government buildings that hasn't changed in decades. Same counters, same fluorescent lights, same quiet echo when people talk. The clerk behind the desk didn't seem surprised when I told her what I needed, just nodded and pulled up the records like she'd done it 1,000 times before. When she printed out the certified copies, she glanced at the map and then at me. "You having trouble with access?" she asked. I gave a small smile. Something like that. She didn't press, just stamped the documents and slid them across the counter. "This is enforceable," she said, almost casually, but there was weight behind it. They can't block this. I thanked her, tucked the papers into my folder, and walked out feeling, not victorious, not yet, but certain. Next call I made was to a surveyor. His name was Pete Alvarez, older guy, probably late 50s, had that weathered look of someone who spent more time outdoors than behind a desk. I'd met him once years ago when a neighbor had a boundary question, and I remembered him being the kind of person who didn't say much unless it mattered. When I explained the situation, there was a pause on the line, then a low whistle. They did what? Poured a full concrete courtyard over it, I said. Another pause, then a short chuckle, not amused, more like disbelief. Well, that's bold. He agreed to come out that afternoon. We met at the edge of the property, my truck parked off to the side, his survey gear already set up like he'd been waiting for a situation like this his whole career. He took his time, checking coordinates, referencing the official map, walking the length of what used to be my driveway. Except now it was a smooth, pristine slab of concrete. Standing there, watching him work, it hit me again how surreal the whole thing was. A week ago, I'd been driving over that exact stretch of gravel. Now it looked like the front entrance to a luxury resort. Pete finally straightened up, looked at me, then down at the ground. No question, he said. This is it. Dead center. I nodded. Mark it. And he did. Bright orange stakes, one after another, driven straight into the ground, or in this case, into the narrow seams along the edges where the concrete met the landscaping. Where he couldn't drive them in, he marked with high-visibility paint, lines cutting across that perfect gray surface like scars. By the time he finished, there was no mistaking it. A straight, unmistakable path running right through the middle of Ryan's brand-new courtyard. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't polite. It was undeniable. And that's when things started to shift. Ryan came out again, this time not casual. No sunglasses, no relaxed posture. He walked faster, eyes locked on the stakes like they were some kind of personal insult. What is this? He asked, sharp, controlled, but you could hear the edge underneath. I stayed where I was, arms folded, letting him take it in. That, I said, is the easement you decided didn't matter. He looked from me to Pete, then back at me. You can't just. I didn't just. I cut in, still calm. This is surveyed. Filed. Certified. Same as it's always been. Pete didn't say much, just held up his clipboard slightly. Matches county records, he added. Ryan's jaw tightened. You could almost see the calculation happening in real time, weighing options, looking for angles. You should have talked to us before doing this, he said. I almost laughed at that, but I didn't. I did, I said. You just didn't like the answer. There was a moment there, a quiet one, where neither of us moved. Then he exhaled sharply and said, We'll handle this through proper channels. Good, I replied. So will I. That afternoon, I made the next call to a real estate attorney. Her name was Lisa Grant, and she came recommended by someone I trusted, which, out here, matters more than any online review. When I laid everything out for her, the documents, the survey, the timeline, she didn't interrupt, didn't react much at all, just listened. When I finished, she leaned back slightly and said, Okay, this is bad for them. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just matter of fact. She explained it in a way that made everything even clearer. The easement wasn't just about my right to pass through, it also protected the land itself from being altered in a way that interfered with that access. What Ryan had done wasn't just inconvenient, it was a direct violation of a recorded property right. And the fact that he did it knowingly, she added, tapping the document lightly. That makes it worse. We filed for an emergency injunction that same week. Now, I didn't know what to expect from that process. Courts move slow, at least that's what people always say. But sometimes, when something is this clear, this documented, this undeniable, things move faster. 3 days. That's how long it took. 3 days for a judge to review everything and issue an order halting all construction on the property until the matter was resolved. I found out early that morning when Lisa called. They've been ordered to stop immediately, she said. No further work until compliance. I drove out there not long after, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see it. And sure enough, everything was still. No trucks, no workers, no noise. Just that massive, half-finished house sitting behind a courtyard now marked with bright orange lines and stakes, like a problem that couldn't be ignored anymore. Ryan was outside again when I pulled up, but this time, He didn't walk over. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching. There was no smile now, no shrug, just tension. And for a moment, I thought, maybe this is where it ends. Maybe he backs down, fixes it, we move on. But then Lisa called me again later that day, and that's when everything changed. Because up until that point, this had just been about access, about a driveway, about one man deciding the rules didn't apply to him. But what Ryan didn't realize, what he hadn't even thought to check, was what ran underneath that strip of land he'd just sealed over with reinforced concrete. And when Lisa said it out loud, I actually leaned back in my chair and just stared at the wall for a second. Because this wasn't just a violation anymore. This was a disaster. Lisa didn't rush it when she explained, and I think that's what made it hit harder. She just laid it out, piece by piece, like she was walking me through something obvious that somehow no one else had bothered to look at. There's a utility line, she said, calm as ever. Primary electrical feed. It runs directly beneath the easement. I remember blinking, sitting there with my phone in one hand, the other resting on that cheap motel table, like my brain needed a second to catch up. Under the driveway? Exactly under it, she said. Which means two things. One, that strip of land isn't just protected for your access, it's also protected for utility maintenance. And two, she paused just long enough. They're not allowed to obstruct it. Not without permission. Not without proper clearance. Definitely not with 6 inches of reinforced concrete. I let out a slow breath, leaning back in the chair, staring up at the ceiling like maybe the answer was written up there somewhere. So what happens now? There was a faint shift in her tone, not excitement exactly, but certainty. Now the utility company gets involved. And that's when the situation stopped being a dispute and started becoming a problem no amount of money or attitude could smooth over quickly. Within a couple of days, there were new trucks on site, not construction crews this time, but utility inspectors. Different energy entirely. No chatter, no music playing, just clipboards, measurements, photos. The kind of people who don't care how nice your house looks, only whether it meets code. I stood off to the side while they worked, hands in my pockets, watching as they traced the same line Pete had marked, comparing notes, checking depths, confirming what we already knew. One of them, a guy with gray hair and a sunburned neck, finally looked up at me and said, "You the easement holder?" I nodded. He glanced back at the courtyard, then shook his head slightly. Yeah, this is going to be an issue. That might have been the understatement of the year. Because by the end of that inspection, the message was clear: no permanent electrical connection would be approved for that house until the obstruction was completely removed. Not partially adjusted. Not worked around. Removed. Which meant tearing out everything that had been poured over that easement. The entire courtyard. The decorative stone. The embedded lighting. All of it. I wasn't there for the first real argument that followed, but I heard about it later from one of the workers who'd been called back just to stand around and wait for instructions. Apparently Ryan wasn't taking it well, voices raised, hands thrown in the air, that same disbelief I'd seen on his face earlier, only now it had nowhere to go. Because this time, it wasn't just me saying no. It was the law. It was the county. It was the utility company. And none of them cared about his design plans. Demolition started about a week later. I made a point of being there the first morning, not out of spite, not exactly, but because I wanted to see it with my own eyes. The same place I'd sat in my truck, staring at that smooth concrete like it had erased something important, now had machinery lined up to undo it. The first crack of that concrete breaking was louder than I expected, sharp, echoing out across the property. It didn't shatter all at once, just fractured, piece by piece, sections lifting, breaking apart, exposing the ground underneath like layers being peeled back. I stood there longer than I probably needed to, watching as that perfect courtyard turned into rubble. Not smiling, not celebrating, just observing. Because there's something about seeing consequences play out in real time that doesn't feel like victory, it just feels inevitable. By the time they were done, the cost of demolition alone had climbed past $70,000. That didn't include the legal fees. Didn't include the cost of restoring the easement exactly to its original condition, gravel, grading, drainage, everything. And it definitely didn't include the time. Because for the next 8 months, that house sat there. Finished on the outside. Clean lines. Glass reflecting the sky. Everything exactly how it was designed to be. Except it had no power. No occupancy permit. No life inside it. At night, When I drove past, it was just dark, a silhouette of what it was supposed to be, sitting there in silence. And I won't lie, there were moments where I'd slow down a little, just for a second, looking at it, thinking about how all of this could have been avoided with one simple decision: respect something that was already there. About 4 months into that stretch, Ryan approached me again. Different this time. No confidence, no casual tone, just controlled frustration. He caught me near the edge of the driveway, now partially restored but still under work, and said, "Let's just end this." I didn't say anything at first, just waited. "I'll buy your property," he continued. "Fair price. Above market." I shook my head before he even finished. "Not interested." He exhaled through his nose, looking away for a second, then back at me. "Then let's move the easement. Properly. I'll cover everything. Survey, construction, whatever it takes." I could hear it in his voice. This wasn't about preference anymore. It was about getting out of a situation that had gotten bigger than he expected. But the thing is, by that point, it wasn't just about the driveway for me either. It was about the way he handled it. The assumption that he could decide something unilaterally and deal with the fallout later. So I kept my answer simple. No. He stared at me for a second, like he was waiting for more, for some explanation, some opening. There wasn't one. Eventually, he nodded once, tight, controlled, and said, "All right." Then he walked away. And that was the last real conversation we had. The rest played out the only way it could. They tore everything out, down to the base. Regraded the land. Rebuilt the driveway exactly where it had always been, following the original survey down to the inch. No shortcuts this time. No improvements. Just compliance. By the end of it, the property looked almost the same as it had before all of this started. Except now there was a massive modern house sitting behind a perfectly ordinary gravel strip that cut straight across its front. Like a reminder, not just of what happened, but of what couldn't be changed. I moved back into my routine after that. Work, home, the usual rhythm. The noise eventually faded, the trucks disappeared, and for the first time in months, things felt quiet again. But every now and then, when I drive that stretch, I think about how close it came to going differently. If I hadn't kept those documents, if I hadn't followed through, if I just accepted what he did and tried to work around it. And I wonder how often things like that actually happen, just on a smaller scale, where someone pushes a little too far and no one pushes back. Because this time, I did, and it worked. But I'll leave you with this. If you came home one day and found your only access to your own property gone, buried under someone else's upgrade, would you fight it the same way? Or would you try to find another path and move on? Let me know what you think, because out here, lines on paper don't always feel real until someone decides to cross them.